Hello and welcome to this podcast episode of Attune In. I'm so thrilled and delighted and grateful to introduce Lou Lebentz. Hi, Lou.
Hello, morning. Lovely to see you.
So lovely to see you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh,
It's lovely. No, it's a pleasure. And we've had a conversation before as a podcast, and it was such a great conversation. So I'm just going to read out your bio so listeners can see all the things that you've done and what experience that you're going to be bringing to the conversation. So Lula Bentz is an international trauma trainer, leader, and speaker, and the founder of The Voyage, a globally recognized trauma informed framework. Originally a UKCP accredited therapist, Lou now focuses on bringing trauma literacy, nervous system regulation, and soul based healing into leadership, justice, education, and wider society. Lou's mission is to change the way we understand trauma so we stop repeating cycles of harm and start building cultures of safety, compassion, and possibility. Wow. Thank you. Amazing. And it's such a relevant space for a tune in, which, as you know, is all about thinking about helping parents with relevant knowledge in a compassionate way so we as parents can understand. Actually, it's a privilege, and we are in a position to really support children with lifelong thinking styles. And I'd love to hear from you in terms of your experience working as a therapist and also building your own trauma recovery intervention. What are your sort of initial thoughts on parenting and trauma?
oh, that's a big question.
It really
That's
is.
a big question. Maybe I should start with, for any parents listening, because trauma is such a big word, isn't it? And trauma is often bandied about and sometimes overused for the things that frankly aren't trauma, but you're underused or maybe misunderstood for the things that are trauma. So I always think of trauma as dysregulation, as a form of dysregulation in the nervous system. And I'm being really mindful too that I think as parents, one takes on enough blame and worry and all the rest of it about what one is doing or not doing towards their children. So I'm really mindful in this episode that whatever we're saying is not meant to shame or blame anyone. However, not all of us, and me included, and maybe more so after 25 years of being a therapist, not all of us are regulated because many people have their own dysregulated nervous system from their own upbringing and their own childhood and things that have happened to them in their life. So I think where I always start with parents, which is where you do too, is how how is their own system? How much trauma have they been through? And how good or maybe not so great are they at that really important job or two jobs of attuning to their children and also co-regulating?
Absolutely. Could
Because
not agree more.
those are probably the two most important things, because when we are kids and even as adults, I would say, we all really lean in towards safety and feeling seen and being soothed. So I always say it's safety, seen, and soothed. And that's really not so much as who we are or our behavior or, what we come home from school with, but it's really about how we're seen emotionally, and how our parents are with us emotionally. And that sometimes depends on our own upbringing and how we are with our own emotions. So I guess where I'd start with trauma is most people that I work with, and I would say most people that come to see me with some form of I'm going to do it in inverted commas, mental health diagnoses or depression or anxiety or OCD or addiction or eating disorder have some form of dysregulation within their nervous system. And therefore, I would say that a lot of that comes from some form of trauma. We just don't understand how we are looking at that term trauma, and people don't really know what trauma actually means if we get down to it.
Absolutely. And what a powerful concept that actually so trauma is a dysregulation of the nervous system. It doesn't necessarily correspond to the nature of the external event. It's actually what happens inside, as Gabor Mate talks about. And the reality is, I think, I don't know what you think, but I'm sure every single person who comes into parenting will have certain wounds from their pasts, some more than others. And
Yeah,
so would you almost even say it's a given that we are gonna, as parents, there is an element of acceptance that we are going to have to some degree, a nervous system that can be optimized, whatever it is, we can do things, little things to support our own nervous system, even if we can't relate to the idea of a traumatic incident. It's not
yeah,
about that.
yes, I think absolutely. And let's move into the nervous system. And absolutely, we can learn to self-regulate as parents without a shadow of a doubt. But I think when we go back to trauma, we're not understanding. I always say there are four aspects to it, and it used to be called big T and little t trauma. Hmm. And it's not really called that anymore because obviously people had a bit of an issue with little t trauma. Um, so I call an aspect one a trauma that we know has actually happened. So it's a war or a tsunami or a rape or abuse that's over, and everybody kind of goes, yeah, that's trauma. But that's only one aspect. So an aspect two trauma is much more prevalent and is what I see in my practice day to day. And an aspect two is a lack of safety, a lack of feeling soothed, being seen, being or feeling co-regulated. So there is not a mirroring that happens for that early infant's and child's nervous system. I say there's no scaffold to scaffold the nervous system against, because somebody else's nervous system is just too chaotic or erratic or unsafe to co-regulate with. So there's no blame here for anybody listening. We're just getting that understanding out there. And
Yes.
aspect three is what we call in psychology an introject from a parent. So an aspect three is our parents' unmetabolized, unprocessed stuff. So if my mum is scared of flying, I might pick up a fear of flying. Or if she doesn't like, or my father hates wasps and runs round the garden, or their own unprocessed material might become mine. And if that wasn't enough, we've got an aspect four as well, which is basically the intergenerational line down through the grandparents and beyond. But also, I call it the soup that we grew up in. And the soup that we grew up in could be the environment, the poverty, the racism, the sexism, the classism, the homophobia, etc., etc., the bullying, the friendship groups. All of that is the soup. And if we've experienced any of those isms or poverty or intergenerational stuff, that's an aspect four. And a lot of people that I see have a variation. They might have one or two of those, and some of them might have all four going on.
Mm. Gosh. So interesting and helpful to see that categorization. And what's coming through to me from what you're saying is basically how realistically common. I'm sure everyone can probably relate to something
Yeah.
in one of those 4 things, but also that no one actually has a choice in any of the above. You know, no one's choosing their soup, no
No,
one's choosing the isms that have come their way,
no,
no one's choosing the way whether their parent had a phobia of wasps. Um, Actually, I think this is a beautiful example of non-judgmental and compassionate exploration of the things that as parents we kind of have to process, but in a kind way that we're not there's not a it's not as though a choice was made and now we've got this thing that we need to metabolize. Actually, let's just be really non-judgmental,
yeah,
really objective, that it is it's an isness. It's a little bit like it rains, you know? Yes, we are gonna and so encouraging that, I think, idea in parents, I think could be extremely empowering for the developing nervous system of the child.
yeah, I agree. And I also think that when we take it away from self and we look down the intergenerational line and what was handed down sometimes, by grandparents or great grandparents in war situations or who fled persecution or grew up in a potato famine or whatever it is, it starts for us to see the lineage and really that there was no other alternative at the time. And also the environmental stuff. I mean, nobody could pick whether we grew up or some children grew up in COVID, and they looked at other people with masks on their face and they weren't allowed to go near anybody so all of those additional nervous system stressors,
Mm,
I always look at somebody as a nervous system, because you can measure the nervous system and I go, what's their cumulative load been?
mm,
What's the intergenerational story? What was the in utero experience? What was that early 3 years like? Did mum and dad have a lot of stress around? Was there lots going on? How secure was the grandparents, the base around them, the structure, the education? Did they get moved from pillar to post? And what kind of environment did they grow up in? Because all of that is going to make a difference. And I sometimes see it as a tread machine, a running machine where, if we're very lucky and we have securely attached parents and we grow up in safety and seen and soothed, well, our tread machine is on a downward gradient. You know, we're almost skipping and jumping because we don't have to work hard. And then the more isms and the more trauma and the more poverty and the more insecurity that we grow up in is almost like the tread machine gets more and more uphill. So some of us are on a gradient of +7 or 8, and it's just far harder for us to climb up that because of all of what's happened in the system.
so helpful. And I just want to say one more time, again, based on what you've just said, it's another call to non-judgmental appreciation of parenting, because some parents are therefore doing all the visible and invisible load of parenting whilst they're on their own uphill treadmill of
Yeah.
all the things that they didn't even choose. Um,
Yes.
and so in a way, I think for parents, I mean, I'm hearing this thinking, actually, there should be no room for guilt and judgment because people are processing all sorts subconsciously, things that they didn't even choose.
Yeah.
Plus, and then the actual stage of parenting is in its own right. Even if somebody, let's say somebody had the most ideal, perfect, trauma free, wound free, ism free childhood, parenting still pushes people to their absolute limits because of the sleep deprivation. You know, there's hormones changing, there's a change of your identity, there may be a change of work and the roles that one plays in their society or community or their family system. There's the fact that it is very unpredictable, children getting, they can't go to school because they've got a fever. So then what do you do? So actually, it needs a lot of gentle, compassionate um understanding.
Totally.
And in reality, what I sort of see in the work I do is parents holding quite a lot of guilt, a lot of fear of judgment. And I suppose that's one of the mission statements for me is to support parents with a non-judgmental lens. And I think hearing from you just now, it makes that a lot easier.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you totally, because I think any form of self-criticism or judgment or beating up on ourselves for the situation that we're in, or how, you know, non-perfect we are, is 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 on a hiding to nothing. Because I think the first place that we have to come from, whether we're a parent or whether we're a trauma survivor or a child or a teenager or anything, is some form of self-understanding and awareness with compassion. Parts of us are always doing the very best that we can with the resources that we've got. And sometimes we just don't have the resources.
Correct. 100%. I fully agree with you. I think for the vast majority of parents, people are doing the best they can with the
Yeah,
knowledge and resources they have.
yeah,
And I think what you're doing, is sort of really trying to boost the knowledge, the
yeah,
facts, because a lot of these facts are missing. It's almost like people are trying to get a lot, do the right thing, but actually they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the understanding that there's all these 4 different types of trauma, and that
yeah,
impacts the nervous system, which impacts our propensity to co-regulate effectively. There's a
yeah.
lot of science here, isn't there?
There's a lot to understand first. And that's why I always think, and this is why I think the podcast is brilliant, because we're giving information out first so that people can assimilate it, get that awareness, and then start to learn, okay, so how do I regulate? How do I learn to, yeah, meet my parts? Because, I think that we all have parts. We've all got critical, defensive, judgmental, and sometimes wounded parts. And it doesn't matter how old we are, if we're 70 or 40 or 14, they're always there. So after I kind of teach people about what trauma is and the different ways of working with it, I always start to teach them about parts, because I think once we see things from a parts perspective, and I know that my adult present moment self is absolutely okay, is absolutely trying their best. And listen, if you've already come to this podcast and you're listening to this about parenting, you are already doing an amazing job. Like, I just want to say that. Anybody that finds themselves here is already like, you know, hats off, really. Let's just celebrate them for listening. But I think if we know that we've all got parts and we've all got an adult, and most of us, well, okay, I'm going to be honest, all of us have got a wounded child part. We've all got some wounding. I don't think any of us escaped childhood with no limiting belief whatsoever in our wounded part, right? I just
Agree.
never met anybody without any limiting beliefs about themselves whatsoever. Never. And I think that all of us then, to protect our wounding and our wounded child part, have adapted protector parts or teenage parts or critical parts that come in to strive not to feel that.
Mm.
So we get defensive. Parts of us are defensive, parts of us are hurting. And then there's this poor adult in the middle trying to hold it all together with these other parts sitting on both of our shoulders. And I think once parents and clients of mine start to see the parts framework, they go, okay, so I'm actually not my irritated, stroppy, anxious, sometimes aggressive, adapted part, but I'm also not my child. Yes, there is a child part of me that needs some attention, and my teenage, stroppy part needs some attention. But actually, my present moment self is doing pretty okay.
That is I'm sure so many parents are going to be extremely interested in this, what you've just said, because I don't think parts knowledge is widely understood, that actually it's very normal to have different parts. And there is the self, the healthy adult part, which is what we're aiming to really build.
Yes,
Um, and that part notices the wounded child or the stroppy or the self-critical scenario. And do you have any so imagine someone's literally for the first time hearing the idea that everyone has parts.
yes,
Um, what would be the most important sort of what are the key messages on how do we, with that information, move forward so that we kind of serve our emotional well-being and we serve co-regulation at home?
okay. So understanding that we have parts and multiplicity of mind doesn't mean that we are schizophrenic. It means that all psychological theories, even Freud, said that we had parts. So everything works through a parts framework, is then stepping back and observing. Where am I now? Which part of me am I in now? What is being activated? Because really, if we come to the nervous system, our adult self, our present moment self, who isn't activated, who is in flow, who is regulated, who is doing okay, is in what we call green in the traffic light system. So I'm okay in that place. I'm in what we call ventral vagal. That's where my nervous system is. And in that place, I can connect and I can co-regulate with others. If I'm not in my adult and I'm not in ventral and green, people can't really connect to me because my social engagement system's turned off and my children can't really connect to me if I'm not in ventral. So I need to observe where am I? Where is my system? And how do I come back to my present moment self, even if parts of me have been activated? Because when we go into our teenager or our critic or our adapted part, we are always in what we call sympathetic arousal. And sympathetic arousal is like fight or flight. It's like adrenaline, cortisol. We start to go into amber. Everything gets a bit heady. It gets a bit frenetic. It gets rushed, hurried, and a bit chaotic. Nobody can connect to that. That just feels energetically a bit exhausting to be around.
Mm.
And then the other thing that we do is our wounded child part, I'm not good enough, or I'm unlovable, or I'm unworthy, or I'm bad, whatever the belief and the wounds are in our childhood. When we go there, we're in red. So the nervous system has gone into something called dorsal vagal. So we're on the freeze, flop, we fawn, we try and people please, but we're kind of on the verge of going into duvet diving. We just shut down. And in that place, before we dissociate, nobody can connect to us because we feel low, we feel flat, we feel depressed, we just can't move almost. So that's how I see the triangle and the three parts. And I'm always trying to encourage clients to say, okay, we're not making adapted or sympathetic or wounded child dorsal bad or wrong or not okay, because we're all there at moments. What we do is we just notice when we're in them, and when we're in them, we come to those parts with compassion. And when our children are in them, because they will be in them a lot, we come to them if we can from our adult rather than going into our adapted and wounded parts.
Wow. I
Does that
just think it makes a lot of sense, and that is so invaluable because I think what you've really done for parents who are on the ground dealing with sympathetic adrenaline on a day-to-day basis, I'm almost certain, just getting
Yeah,
them out the door in
because
the
life
morning.
is chaotic too, and it's stressed and it's busy, and financially a lot of people are under worry, and there's never enough hours in the day, and all of that's going on as well as everything else.
Absolutely. And I think what you've really done beautifully is normalized the fact that human beings, by virtue of being human beings, are going to be kind of passing in and out of those different
All the
states
time, all the time.
all the time. And
Yeah.
actually, there really ideally ought to be just compassion and observation
Yes,
in a non-judgmental lens rather than thinking, "Oh, I must be a terrible parent because, I snapped at my child." Actually, it should be, "I went into sympathetic, I went
yeah,
into fight,
yeah,
something triggered my nervous system." And actually, I think the next step, which I think is then the parent being curious about I wonder what it took for my nervous system to be triggered, which put me into fight, which meant I was a bit rude. And actually, I need to now repair that rupture because that doesn't stand for the parent I want to be. So I'm gonna repair the rupture, and I'm
yeah,
also gonna be curious about myself. And I wonder why I'm sensitive or really worried about whatever I was worried about, which put me into sympathetic. So
yeah.
you're normalizing the fact that it doesn't mean you're a failing parent that needs to then carry loads of guilt. Actually, it's literally a little bit like the weather, isn't it? It rains
Yeah.
sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it hails. It just is.
But we're not never gonna rupture. Like, it's even a perfect parent isn't a parent that never ruptures, because actually, if there's never any ruptures, you're not really teaching the nervous system how to handle the stresses and strains of life, because we rupture, unfortunately, all of us with people all the time. Our
Absolutely.
bosses, our co-workers, the person at the petrol pump, or the guy that tried, or woman, sorry to be sexist, that tried to cut me up in the car. You know,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
we do rupture all the time. I think what you're saying, which is really important, is how do we go in to repair that rupture? And when we go in to repair it, are we in ventral? Are we doing it from a regulated place? And can we own our part of it? Rather than making it about the child or the teenager or somebody else, can we own our part of it? You know, I'm really sorry, sweetheart. Mummy didn't or daddy didn't mean to shout at you at that moment. This is what happened, and it was not about you, it was about where I was at, and please don't take it personally, and I'm really sorry. Because children, as we know, are egocentric, aren't they?
Mm.
Doesn't mean that they've got big egos, but it means that they make everything that happens out there for their first 10 years mean something about them. So really, I think as parents, what we're trying to say is, because I'm in a bad mood, or I had a terrible day, or I've just had an argument, it doesn't mean that you're a bad child, or that you're unlovable, or there's anything wrong with you. It's something that's going on within me. And I think if we can get that across,
Mm.
then building the next generation of children who don't have all these limiting beliefs, who don't make everything mean something about them, who know that they're loved just for who they are, you know, unconditionally. And that's really important too, I think.
Absolutely. Goodness me. I mean, it's pretty huge, everything you're saying. And you're right. It is literally, we're talking then about a child seeing a parent model the fact that they operated out of their best self.
Yes.
Yeah. And they recognize that and they apologize, repaired. And actually, that's modeling to the child then that, okay, that means when I make a mistake or if I snap at my sibling because they took my train and I'm not such a terrible person. I just need to watch what my parent did, repair the rupture,
Yeah.
and not be too hard on myself, the way my parent wasn't too hard on themselves. And so we're normalizing, repairing ruptures, we're normalizing making mistakes, we're normalizing that no one is perfect and that was never even an option. So why does anyone even try? And then we raise a generation of children who are able to bounce in and out of their nervous system variation, but not judge themselves. They're kind of noticing. There's no shame. It's more observational, curious. And I think you're absolutely right that all of that underpinning it needs to be a core belief that I'm loved no matter what. I'm loved for who I am and someone's got my back. And
Yeah.
if that is there, I think it's easier to be non-judgmental to our rupture repair. I think if we're not, and even with parents, I'd love your opinion here. I actually wonder whether some of if a parent's propensity to do all this, to be non-judgmental, to be compassionate to their mistakes and repair ruptures, that relies on a certain sense self-esteem in the parent to say, do you know what? I am a good person. I love myself enough to forgive myself for a mistake I made. But if you have a parent who's come to parenting with a self-esteem that doesn't say that, then I
Yes.
can see how that interplays with parenting.
Totally, and I think it's down to and I think there's self-esteem and there's self-worth and there's self-acceptance and there's self-compassion and there's all those wonderful aspects of self that in an ideal world we would all grow up having those things innately. But we don't. We don't, sadly, because I think for many of us, the first 16 years or 20 years is about sometimes, not always by parents too, but
Mm,
by teachers and schooling and peers and other people. You know, we are taught often, many of us, that something about us just doesn't measure up quite. So I
mm,
think that self-esteem and that self-worth and that, you know, stronger sense of our adult self is not so there because maybe 50% of the time I can be in my adult, but
mm,
not 80% of the time. Nobody, by the way, is ever 100% of the time in their adult, even if you've been a therapist for 25 years. Let me tell you, we're not. But I think that what activates us or what undermines our self-esteem are the beliefs in our wounded part.
mhm,
And if we've got a I'm not good enough or I mean listen, I think I've worked out there's at least 60 beliefs or 65 beliefs that are limiting that we absorb as children that then run our unconscious patterning. So I always think self-esteem and self-worth comes from those. Huge, yeah. And they're in different in they're in different kind of subcategories. So, you know, one is self-defectiveness and one is choice and control and one is about belonging and connection. One is about responsibility and over responsibility. So we've got all these different categories and they range from I'm a bad person or I'm rubbish or I'm useless or I'm worthless or I'm undeserving to I'm a failure or I'm never going to be a success.
Mm.
And they're all that for me, it's that within us that activates us. It's when those are triggered that we snap, that we go, that our adapted comes in. So the more work we do on our own beliefs and our own limiting beliefs, the more I think we can remain in adult, and then the wider our window of tolerance becomes because we're triggered less.
Absolutely. And just to sort of connect that, so we're triggered less, so then we are not in sympathetic adrenaline, cortisol mode, which you mentioned earlier is
Yeah.
not it's not easy for anyone to connect with that mode. So
No.
if we're talking about parent-child connection, and we all agree that connection is good, we all agree children need attunement, but this is such a big part of the puzzle because what you're saying is if parents are triggered because of core beliefs, those limiting beliefs of which there
Yeah.
are 60, and
Yeah.
actually everyone's gonna have some of them to some
Yeah.
degree, then that means we are gonna get triggered in life, and then our nervous system is gonna go into that activated place, and then our children struggle to connect with that because they're egocentric, they see things as it's all their fault, or it must be because I did something, or I didn't wake up on time, or I took too long to put my shoes on, that's why. So it's all a chain reaction, and
All
none of those things anyone has really chosen. An adult parent does not choose their limiting beliefs because we're talking about a chapter in their life,
Yeah.
when it was about their caregivers, their teachers, their peers, their bullies at school,
Yeah.
whatever the experiences they had. So once again, it's a very lovely example that there is no room for guilt or judgment or shame in this conversation.
No, there isn't room for any of that. What there is room for, and what I always gently speak to, is once the awareness and the information is there and the knowing, there's
Mm,
room for responsibility.
interesting. Expand.
So I know that I am activated. I know that I go into sympathetic or dorsal. I know that this thing about my child really triggers me. What's going on there? And once I know that I'm not connecting in ventral or I'm not able to co-regulate, then I've got a choice to make then about what can I do to really be co-regulated within a relationship or do my own healing so that I can be a better co-regulator for my child. And there's the responsibility piece.
I literally love that, Lou, because I think some people feel that all this emotional literacy and understanding and compassion stuff, like where are the boundaries then? Are we actually saying that all we do is just we non-judgmentally, compassionately observe each other? Where are the boundaries? And parenting is, such a big part of parenting for me is boundaries. It's so essential. And what you're actually saying there is a responsibility with the knowledge, with the understanding, with the trigger points to then make a choice,
Yes.
on what can I do as an adult to, be a bit more empowered with my trigger points.
Yes.
If I need to go off and do some of my own work, I'm gonna do that because it's important for my child to co-regulate with me, and then that child will grow, and their nervous system will then have as healthy an opportunity as possible to build. And because we're talking about a building, we're talking about the architectural process of a new nervous system now.
Yeah.
And so what a great reason for parents to say, do you know, I'm a human, this triggers me, I don't want to be triggered, I want to be a co-regulated, connected parent as much as I can. I won't do that 100% because I'm a human and that's not possible, but
Yeah.
actually I can go and do my own work.
Yeah. Totally, totally, totally. That's 100% it. That's exactly what I feel too. absolutely. And then the only thing that I'll say about boundaries is children feel much safer with parents who have boundaries, not rigid walls that never move and not no boundaries at all. And boundaries that come from the adult, that come from ventral, not boundaries that are made from the adapted sympathetic or even the dorsal child. Those boundaries do not work. Boundaries that are said in a very adult way, but containment. We all need containment. So we're not saying don't have any boundaries, but we're saying implement the boundaries from adult. And when you're in adult, you are naturally compassionate. You're naturally curious. You're naturally calm and centered and all those wonderful C's. You are already. Just don't make the boundary from adapted.
Amazing. 100%. And that's exactly what I talk about a lot in some of the content on Attune In. The importance of when you say adult, just to remind, you're talking about the regulated nervous system. If we bring a boundary from the activated nervous system, so
Yeah.
when we're triggered, then it looks like if you do this, you're not getting this.
Punishment.
Punishment or bribe
Like
or threat.
punishment or
Yeah.
threats. I
Threats,
don't care how
crime,
old you are, like, none of us
good
like
thanks. No, absolutely, and all it's doing is putting their nervous system into that
yeah,
activated state, and
yeah,
a really important point you mentioned that I just wanna repeat again because it's I don't know, I want to sort of put a bit of a spotlight on it. You talked about the social engagement system,
yeah,
which is speaking to the ability to connect with other human beings, right?
yeah,
Right? So if we want to put a boundary down because we realize, look, a child's otherwise going to not, this will affect their schoolwork, or they may think that something unsafe is safe and I need to correct that with a boundary. If we are coming from activated adult, we say it in a way that triggers their nervous system. They're now activated and sympathetic.
yes,
No one is listening to each other and no one is able to socially connect with each other. So the boundary is not going to land because the nervous system and isn't really going to let the child take the boundary in. And meanwhile, it's exhausting being adrenalined up and in sympathetic. So the parent is getting more drained and emotionally exhausted. They're
yeah,
not going to have their boundary heard. And actually, what happens then is a disconnect builds between the parent and the child. So it's like the opposite of what anyone probably wants. And so what you're saying is put the boundary when you are not activated, get
yes,
yourself into your healthy adult mode or your adult self, i.e., not triggered, activated.
yeah,
And then you'll naturally say it with compassion, kindness, and in a way that will activate your child's system and
yeah,
they'll hear it.
yeah, spot on. And listen, if adult doesn't work, because adult doesn't work for a lot of people, you can use anchored self or
Okay.
core self or real me.
Can you tell me more about those, please?
Yeah, so sometimes adult, people don't like to think of adult adapted wounded. They prefer to call the adult my present moment self or my core self
Mhm.
or my essence or my anchored self because I'm anchored in that moment. So if people have got a problem with adult, because sometimes even healthy and or functional are kind of labels that people go, well, yeah, because I'm always thinking that the other parts of people aren't really unhealthy or even dysfunctional. They're just fight, flight, freeze, flop friend.
Interesting. Got it. Okay. So we're not so in a way then saying healthy adults a bit of a there's a judgment there and you're saying that
Judgment.
we shouldn't be judging any of these
No,
parts.
they're not.
So tell me about anchored self.
Well, I came up with anchored self because one of my clients hated to think that she had to be an adult. And she didn't ever want to be an adult, even though she was in her 70s, because she had never been parented. So there were parts of her that said, why should I be an adult? I've never had an adult look after me. I just want an adult to look after me and parent me. I don't want to have to be the adult or the parent. I just want to be the child. So we came up with Anchor because she could cope with Anchor, my anchored self. She
Yes.
could not cope with the word adult or parent.
Interesting. Okay, got it. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that, and that all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, wow, Lou, I mean, we're coming towards the end of the conversation, and I just feel we could carry on, couldn't we, frankly?
Probably. I don't know if everybody listening could carry on. Maybe we'll have to do a part B.
Yeah, exactly. No, but thank you so much. You've literally offered so much richness in what you've said, and I, as a parent, actually feel so sort of empowered and just more positive, and I think that's what we wanna feel as parents, and, I would love you just to tell us a little bit about what you're building and also how people can get in touch with you or find out more about this space.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm still a therapist as a part-time role. I do EMDR, etc., intensives and work with people, but mainly I am building the Voyage, which is a trauma recovery healing program. And at the moment, I'm teaching coaches and clinicians and therapists, but I am actually going more into the legal sector now and also leadership. And at some point, it will be ready for the general public. It's not quite there yet, but hopefully at some point. So, if anybody works in any of the domains that are mental health professionals or, working in nursing or education or law or human resources, please reach out because the Voyage is coming to that area soon. So,
So exciting. And just to say thank you so much for what you're building. I just the ripple effect is astronomical. You know, if we can help the future nervous systems, if we
yeah, of the world, wouldn't that be amazing? And right back at you too for all that you're doing and building. As you know, I'm a huge fan and here to support you all the way because it's collective, isn't it, what we're doing? And we are trying to help all of us be more regulated as human beings because then we might create a little bit more of a regulated world out there.
indeed. Thank you so much, Lou. Such
Right,
a pleasure
yeah.
to talk to you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you
Take
so
care,
much.
Lou.
Take care.
Pleasure.
Bye.